Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund earlier this week faulted Nigeria's economic recovery claim. The World Bank's stand, which was contained in its bi-yearly economic update for the region, stated, "Beyond sub-Saharan Africa's regional averages, the picture is mixed. The recovery in Nigeria, South Africa, and Angola, the region's three largest economies, has remained weak and is weighing on the region's prospects," end of quote. President Muhammadu Buhari disagrees. He made this known while setting an agenda for members of the newly constituted Presidential Economic Advisory Council, saying data provided by the World Bank and the IMF is unreliable and homegrown data should be developed instead. Joining us now to speak on the country's economic recovery plan is Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director of COWRY Asset Management. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
So before we jump into the budget that President Muhammadu Buhari presented this week, I'd like your take on what I just read in the intro, the IMF and the World Bank sort of cautionary notes, and the president seeming to dismiss that tone of caution and the agenda that he has set for his new economic council. Of all the things that he could possibly have emphasized, he seems to prioritize this local data collection, saying that what is presented by all these multilateral agencies are wild estimates. What are your thoughts on all that?
You know, interestingly, when I saw that comment, I was worried. Simple reason that it was an indictment on what the job the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics has been doing. Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is funded by both local government and multilateral agencies. And over time, they've developed a lot of data and a lot of competence. So if you say that the data we have are not reliable, and they want the advisory council to go and gather data. And we already have a Nigerian Bureau of Statistics churning out data on all aspects of Nigerian economic performance. And those data are in consonance with what the World Bank is also publishing. Take, for instance, the World Bank is projecting an economic growth of about 2.3% this year, which for me is even optimistic. Because if you look at where we are today, we've only grown, the first quarter of the year, we grew by 2.1%. Second quarter, we grew by 1.94%. So you really need to grow like 2.5, 2.7% the last two quarters to achieve a 2.3%. So if they tell you your economy is going to grow about 2.3%, at a point when data from your local data management agency, Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, also showed that you actually grew at less than 2%, I mean, it's difficult for you to fall that. And most importantly, if you say that we are relying on wide gaze data, and that data is reconciling with the data from your own internal organization. So it's actually, for me, an indictment on NBS. But I don't think maybe the president thought of that or meant to do that, but that's actually what he ended up doing by saying that, look, we don't have internal data, and the Economic Advisory Council, which is not actually their calling. Their call is to use available data to advise the government on how to manage the economy. They do not have the wherewithal to start gathering data on the GDP growth rate, which sectors of the economy are growing, what rate are they growing, what is the share of each sector of the economy to the total GDP or productive activity. There's already a body that has developed competence in doing that. So that's and one of the things that World Bank said is that the growth rate in Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa are dragging down the average growth rate in Africa because these three economies are the largest economies in Africa. They account for more than 50% of the economic productive activity in Africa. So if they are growing at very suboptimal rates, then the impact is that they will depress the overall African growth rate. And those are facts. So they are indisputable facts.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I know. I'm so glad that for you it also raised a red flag, because I think when international bodies corroborate data that is coming from local, because what we've always complained about for many years was that there wasn't validated local data. Now that local data is being validated, we've had the Bureau of Statistics here many times, and they're being lauded locally and globally.
Yeah.
So I think that this was a misalignment of communication, or maybe knowledge or understanding of the data available and the sources of that data, because there isn't really a lot of dispute around what the international bodies are saying and what our local bodies are saying. And I also think that it would not be a very good way for this economic advisory team to spend their time when we have...
They don't even have the resources to go that way.
When setting an agenda, why should that be top of the list for them?
I wanted to ask you another question, which we talked about earlier in sort of the week that was, which is sort of this, this banning of the ministers from traveling, although it's not an absolute ban, so that they can defend their budget. In your opinion, especially with looking at past budget experiences, do you think this is a good move, or do you think it's a bit heavy-handed and paternalistic?
No, I think it's largely inconsequential. What do I mean by that? It's basically, for me, a routine administrative issue. If the National Assembly wants to, their committees want to speak to the ministers in the next 2 weeks, the president can give, it shouldn't actually be a national news. It should actually be an internal directive to restrict their movement to align with the callings or the invitations of the National Assembly to defend the budget figures. That's what it should be for me. But the way it was presented, that they have been banned from traveling outside the country until they finish defending their budget, made it sensational. For me, it was a very administrative issue, and it shouldn't even be in the news. It should have been a quiet directive. Okay, ensure that you relate with the National Assembly to know when your invitation will come, and whenever the invitation comes, you go and meet with them. It shouldn't be like all of us should sit down at our desk and wait until we're invited. I'm sure the National Assembly will drop a timetable that says, look, we need this minister to be here on so and so date, and you would, and none of the ministers go there more than a day. So
sure. So if you have travel, as long as you're back in the country, especially if it has
smoothly aligned with the National Assembly timetable.
Yeah, there's some language that we use. I guess it akens back to our military history, which is words like ban, or I think
but
so.
It wasn't a ban. I think the headlines is one thing, the story is another.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, I think it seems to tally with the view of a lot of people about that whole directive when the president told the ministers, don't call me, I'll call you. Essentially, that you can't just approach me, you have to go through the chief of staff, which in itself is not a bad thing, but the way it was announced gave it more importance or more gravity than it needed.
Is
that what you're saying, Mr. Chukwu?
Yeah.
So now let's look at the budget. I
Very
really
ambitious.
do worry. What are your thoughts on the fact that debt servicing is gulping 24.2%, which is nearly a quarter of the 10.3 trillion naira budget that's been presented? I mean, it's...
There are a lot of things that are of concern to me on the budget, apart from the share of debt service. Debt service share is a derived problem we have arrived at. Over time, we've accumulated debt. We are almost about 30 trillion naira debt. And you have to service that debt. So if you keep building debt, you should know that the share of debt in your total expenditure will keep increasing.
Yes, but then while you're servicing the debt, you also have to boost your revenue.
You see, the challenge we have, which is the core of the problem, is that we have consistently delayed budget that are overly optimistic on revenue projections. And for that reason, we build costs that align with our expectations of revenue, when historically we know that we have never achieved anything close to the target we've set.
Never.
So, and we, year in, year out, we keep ballooning our projections. And because those projections are never achieved, we are left, because we have built costs in line with an unrealistic.
But why do we continue with these unrealistic projections?
I'm coming. So basically, what happens is that you continue to have a huge funding gap, which you now have to borrow to fund. And therefore, you keep ballooning your borrowing costs, because the structure of our fiscal framework is not sustainable, it's suboptimal. And that's where your next question came to. Why do we keep projecting revenue that are not achievable?
Yeah.
And then why? The simple reason is that we have a fiscal framework that's not sustainable. I'll give you a few examples. We are spending about 1.2 trillion naira on the servicing of petroleum subsidies. The president said in his budget broadcast that part of the reasons why we had a revenue shortfall in 2019 is because of under-recovery from petroleum prices. Under-recovery simply means subsidy. So when you spend 1.2 billion, that should have come in as revenue, because it deducted as a first line item. It deducted before the net amount is shared. So you have that shortfall in revenue. Add it back, claw it back. So if you are spending an average of 1.2 trillion naira, the first half of the year you would have spent 600 billion. If you added it to the revenue received in the first half of the year of 2.04 trillion, you would have gotten 2.6 trillion. You would have narrowed your budget deficit in the first half of the year from 1.3 trillion to 700 billion. So those are the facts. We are running a fiscal framework that is not sustainable until we remodify it. And because we're doing that, we also are not cautioning ourselves, look, these projections are not realistic. So we can't be building in the castle in the air. You really have to do a budget that's not realistic. Then to do that, you really cannot fund fiscal infrastructure from budgetary allocation. And that's the core of the problem. And we are not even funding fiscal infrastructure as it stands today from budgetary allocation. We are borrowing every kobo that is spent on fiscal infrastructure. I'll give you live data. Last year, from budget IT, total government revenue last year was 3.86 trillion naira. Our expenditure last year, recorded expenditure including debt service, was 5.85 trillion, leaving a gap of 2 trillion unfunded. And the government said they spent about 1.86 trillion naira in capital expenditure, which was entirely borrowed. Because if your recorded expenditure was higher than your total revenue, it simply means you borrowed to pay debt and to pay salaries and wages.
Which is, yeah.
So you cannot say you did any capital expenditure from your revenue.
Yeah.
And those are the crux of the matter. We have a fiscal framework that's not sustainable, and we're not addressing it. We are just walking into the gulag, blindfolded, as if we're not seeing clearly we're going to fall into the valley.
Yes, even the oil benchmarks.
Yes,
I mean, do we not all read the papers? OPEC is saying there's going to be a glut in 2020.
And we've still budgeted.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that when we come back, and we're going to take a short break after this. But I think that, you know, this is really concerning. This is okay. I guess we can start actually on that. Let's talk about the benchmarks that we actually have and the production estimates we have very briefly before we go on break, and we'll pick that up. Any red flags for you?
Okay, no. The basic thing is the projected budget price benchmark is $57 per barrel. Today, oil is trading about that same level. The volume production, which is of greater concern to me, is 2.18 million barrels. The president's budget announcement said, look, on average, 2019, we have only produced 1.86 million barrels per day.
Oh, and I was afraid this will happen. We'll come right back and pick up there. We're going on a short break. When we come back, we'll continue to talk about the budget. Welcome back to the morning show. We're still in studio with Mr. Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director of COWRY Asset Management. Before we went on break, you had actually raised another red flag, which is your concern around production. When you look at the production that the budget is based on, which is 2.18 million barrels per day, and the last couple of, the history over the last couple of months, which has been 1.9. Let's pick up on that.
So the basic thing is this. If you extend that further, you observe that in the last 1 week, the news media has been replayed with reports of increase in bridging of pipelines. So if you're having an increase in bridging of pipelines, it simply means that you may not even be able to sustain your 1.86 million barrels
a
production.
115% increase.
So it means you may not even be able to sustain your 1.86 million barrels crude production on average. You're talking on average basis. So any day you do not at least do 1.86, you have to do more than that the next day to compensate for it. So the reality is that you do not have the capacity to meet your revenue projections. So you have you may actually say you have a reasonably realistic price target, but an unrealistic budget provision. And if you look at the president's speech, he said that our revenue shortfall was partly because we were not able to meet our production target, though it was partly compensated by a higher crude price in the first half of the year. But that higher crude price is not likely to be sustained. Simple reason that the issue that could have distorted oil prices, that could have led to an increase in oil price, have all happened. They bombed out a significant percentage of Saudi production. And now they have clawed back those production. And we've seen oil price trading downwards. So if oil price could not sustain the spike as a result of the attack on oil facility in Saudi, then what other stronger factor
Nothing.
It's simply
There are
not
no
going to happen.
indicators.
the market.
It's not going to happen, according to the International Energy Agency, and I'm so disappointed. I really thought it was going to be so
would
good
be a
for
bump.
us.
There was not going to be a
I
bump.
really was optimistic. So what happens now with this budget of, they always have a theme. This year, it's the budget of sustaining growth and job creation. Will it actually do either of those things? Because the president has set himself quite a steep target of lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years.
Well, that for me, that's a desirable wish. And you mark my word, wish. It's a desirable wish. All of us would ordinarily want 100 million people lifted out of poverty in 1 year, not even in 10 years. But the key thing is that it's going to be driven by policies. And we're looking for those policies. I hope that's why the president empaneled the Economic Advisory Council to advise him on how to go about that. I mean, he made mention of that in his inaugural speech to them. One of the priorities is to actually improve the standard of living of Nigerians. So I'm expecting that in the next few days or few weeks, we should see policies that have the capacity to grow the economy at a rate higher than the current level. We have policies that are targeted at specific sectors of the economy that have the capacity to grow jobs. We have policies that are defined to stimulate infrastructure development that will support productive activities. Those policies are still missing. If you look at the budget 2020, which is a major fiscal framework that the government has, and look at the allocation to capital expenditure of 2.14 trillion naira out of a 10.33 trillion, which of course we know will not be fully, it just accounts for about 20% of the budget provision. But look at specifics. Ministry of Works and Housing.
They got the land.
262. You see, when we say they got a chunk of it, it's funny because it's in relative terms. You are comparing something from
something that might never happen.
Yeah, so from Lilliput to foul. I said this one is even working and this one is on the ground. 262 billion naira will barely be enough to do the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road.
Yes. Oh, Zainab Ahmed said we need $100 billion a year.
Thank you. Now, you have other arterial roads that have collapsed. You are dealing with Shagamu Bini. You have to do Onitsha to Enugu. You have to do Enugu to Port Harcourt. You have to do Kano to Kaduna. You have to do to Maiduguri. You have several arterial federal highways that are not in motorable condition. And you have budgeted 262 billion. And people are saying Ministry of Works and Housing took the chunk. Chunk of what?
It's not,
a chunk of a budget that doesn't even exist
yet.
yet.
It's a chunk of a fantasy, but it's still a chunk. I mean, what do
now, let's look at the next critical infrastructure. Transport, Ministry of Transport, they got 1.7 billion naira. It is not enough to pay counterpart funding to activate any of these Chinese loans that are necessary to build any of the corridors that they have mapped out in their plan. Ministry of Power. 123 billion. That is the sector where the government said, because the government still control the transmission grid. That's where they say they're going to rebuild the transmission grid to wheel out 10 terabytes of power. So what with 23 billion naira? What is 123 billion naira converted to dollars? So reality is that we can't fund capital development from budgetary allocation because we don't have the revenue profile. And some of us have advocated repeatedly, why don't we look at alternative funding arrangements? Sure. Until we adopt that, we're going to be running in cycles. And that alternative funding arrangement is that we should bring in foreign capital, we should bring in private capital by evolving viable public-private partnership arrangement where private sector can build infrastructure, manage over time, and transfer to the government. One of the failings that I look at and I squirm is the fact that we revoked the second Niger Bridge from a public-private sector-driven infrastructure development into a budgetary funded project. And we are allocating about 10 to 15 billion naira every year to it. For a project that you need about 200 billion, if you're giving 15 billion, you need more than 10 years. Because over time, you're going to have cost variation as a result of movement in prices. Course. So you're not going to...
And degradation, so you have to upgrade.
And when you give them 10 or 15 billion, they mobilize, afterward they demobilize. Because when they demobilize, you have to pay additionally for them to mobilize back to site. So but that corridor, that facility would have been working today. And people will be gladly happy to pay toll and drive from Asaba to Onitsha in 10 minutes. Today, it takes 4 hours to cross from Asaba to Onitsha. Do you know the loss of man-hour? Do you know the financial cost of that? Anybody who is on that corridor will pay you 1,000 naira to go through a toll road. But we want to do it for budgetary allocation. We don't have the money.
One of the things I wanted to just ask you as we start to wrap up here is around the exchange rate that the budget is pegged to, which is 305 in comparison to what we're experiencing on a daily basis, which is 360. I want to get your feeling about that and how that affects the overall servicing of debt and other things. And actually, what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of months with the exchange rate?
The exchange rate the CBN will continue to defend the exchange rate.
For how long, though?
Unless there's a major dislocation. Today they have about $41.7 billion in reserve. Unfortunately, our trade balance on current account balance has turned negative, which actually for me is a yellow flag, not a red flag. Because when your current account balance turns negative, it simply means we're currently importing physical goods more than the value of our export. Our major export is crude. So if you have a further distortion in crude production, you could actually have a worsening of the current account balance. Unfortunately, on the invisible side, that is flow of capital between country and other countries. We are seeing a decline in the amount of foreign portfolio investment coming to the country. So over time, that will build up pressures on the foreign reserve. But that may take quite some time, maybe up to 9 months to 1 year. So in the immediate, you're going to see some stability in the exchange rate. If this persists over time, the exchange rate will come under pressure because foreign reserve will come under pressure. But back to the issue of the exchange rate the government used, there is actually no business transaction being done in the country at 305.
None.
So why use it? Optics?
If you ask me, I'll ask the president.
That's another fantasy. But before we run out of time, which we almost are, let's talk about the paltry amount that was allocated to health.
And education.
46 billion, yes, and education. 46 billion for health and education.
You know,
what are we supposed to do?
Let me tell you, if you look at the minimum development objective and sustainable development objective of the World Bank, the key things to grow, to focus on, and human capital.
Yes.
And the two critical funding elements of human capital, education and health.
Yeah.
If you don't get your quality of human capital right, start from education, then health, then you're not going to build an economy that will have the mental capacity to compete with the world.
Well, with health, I'm adding the UBEC allocation, so that's not as awful as the health one. Sorry, with education,
if you add
that's
UBEC.
48 billion, and then UBEC 112. Yeah. But health, 46 billion.
Let me ask you, do you know the number of Nigerians who are of school age? What percent of our population are of school age?
Unfortunately.
More than 48% of our population that should be in school.
Yeah.
48% of 200 million.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you
so much.
I feel like this was a day of red and yellow flags, and I didn't hear any green flags being flown.
None whatsoever.
But thank you so much for being here.